Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you so much for tuning in. In case you don't know, you will know. Fire away some comments on the Thomas Take video below. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Ryan Thomas Take, YouTube and Facebook, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm hopping on here to dive into the biggest storylines that are taking place right now in the world of mixed martial arts. As always, I like to dive into all sports topics, whether that be the Buffalo Bills, obviously, or MMA, or baseball, football, hockey, you name it. If I find it interesting, if I find it to be a topic that the people want to hear me give my take on it, I'm going to do it. But this show originated on the MMA underground forums. This show got its legs from me diving into mixed martial arts. So I have to appease the MMA audience by talking about some of the biggest topics, biggest storylines in the sport of MMA in particular. These storylines kind of mesh within the UFC mostly, but some of which mesh with Bellator as well. So first off, I want to start off the show by diving into a storyline that broke yesterday. I posted it on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Facebook page. UFC President Dana White did say that Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier Part 2 could potentially be taking place. Now, they are waiting on whether Conor will accept the bout. Dustin Poirier has accepted the bout. But the headline for me is Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier 2. Really? I did not see this one coming. In terms of all the fights that could be out there for Dustin, in terms of all the fights that could be out there for Conor, I did not see the Conor McGregor-Dustin Poirier rematch coming to fruition. But that is under normal, ideal circumstances. That is under the fact that we have two fighters that have mutually agreed to donate money to one another's philanthropic causes. More so Conor towards Dustin Poirier, because we know what Dustin Poirier does for his community, the Louisiana, New Orleans in particular community. Daniel Cormier has talked about the charitable efforts that Dustin Poirier carries out each and every day with the Good Fight Foundation. And Conor McGregor, I think, out of sheer generosity, not what I've read, phony, people are saying that he's a phony, that he's just doing this as a PR stunt. He's obviously doing it to help his image. I mean, his image has taken a few hits, but I think the genuineness of the offer to donate to Dustin Poirier's charity is 100% there. And I think that is a great thing for not just Conor's career, not just Dustin's career, but for the professionalism aspect of MMA. Oftentimes, the biggest critique is that MMA fighters are not the most professional in terms of how they act in certain situations by casual fans. Casual fans, or not even casual fans, but outsiders, say that mixed martial artists are not professional enough. And I think that this is a shining example as to, two guys being professional, true professionals, two guys showing that, yeah, they care about one another's charitable causes. In the case, Dustin Poirier's Good Fight Foundation has become an extremely important foundation to the state of Louisiana. Dustin Poirier has become Louisiana royalty, having days named after him, having all sorts of public support for what he has done for his community. So this is a good thing. And when I look at it from the fighting aspect of things, Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier, I look at it like this. I say to myself, Conor needs an opponent. Dustin needs an opponent. We don't know what is next for either one of these guys if they don't fight one another, right? It was rumored that Dustin Poirier would then fight Tony Ferguson. It was rumored that Conor McGregor could be taking on a guy by the name of Manny Pacquiao, which is just, mind-blowing. When I read that news, I was like, really? But that's not news to my ears. That's not new news to my ears. That has been rumored for quite some time that Conor could potentially fight Manny Pacquiao. But this is a fight that makes sense under the rankings of the UFC lightweight division. And this is a fight that I think could be the number one contenders fight for the UFC lightweight championship. Whoever wins this fight, whether it's Conor or Dustin Poirier, does get a crack at the winner of Khabib and Justin Gaethje. And I think that is really important. The guy that's coming out on the losing end of this, I think, is Tony Ferguson. And, Tony's one of those guys that he's just in such an awkward spot, right? Due to the fact that he lost that fight to Justin Gaethje in the fashion that he did, it was one of the most dominant losses in terms of Tony's career and one of the most dominant victories in the career of Justin Gaethje. And it was a risky fight. It was a risky bet for Tony Ferguson to bet on himself, take this fight with Justin Gaethje on short notice. He takes that chance. He loses. Then, you're on the outside looking in. You're on the outside looking in of your own weight class, a weight class that Tony Ferguson has ruled over for the last, 10 years. And with that comes, well, who's next for Tony? Dustin Poirier. Well, Dustin Poirier wanted more money. The only way Dustin Poirier is going to get more money is if he's fighting a guy like Conor McGregor. And if Conor McGregor slaps on the fact that, yeah, he would donate to his charity, that's big. Originally, when this fight kind of started to circulate, news of it started to circulate, that was on the Twitter sphere. And it was Conor saying that, yeah, Marcus of Queensberry rules boxing. These guys were going to do a charity boxing match. Dana White said, whoa, I'm the boss. You guys are my employees. You're under contract within the Ultimate Fighting Championship. If you guys want to fight, you can fight under our brand, under our banner, in our octagon. And if you guys want to come to an agreement as far as what compensation could be for Conor to give out of his fight purse to Dustin Poirier's Good Fight charity, Good Fight Foundation, then we can do that. And it's just a solid business move for Conor, and it's a solid business move for Dustin Poirier. It's a solid business move for the UFC. It makes fight sense. It makes fighter sense, and it's a great fight for the fans. So I'm looking forward to seeing whether that actually comes to fruition or not. We're awaiting Conor's acceptance of the bout. Dustin Poirier has accepted. So, he gave his tweet acceptance for the fight. I accept was the tweet. So we'll see what happens there. Now, this is not a reality headline. This is Israel Adesanya coming off one of the most dominant performances I've ever seen from a champion against a challenger, and a challenger that believes he is a challenger to Israel Adesanya. Really? That's what I thought when I first heard that Chris Weidman was interested in a bout with Israel Adesanya. The tough part is Chris Weidman could be as interested as anyone in fighting Israel Adesanya, and I think he is. I think in terms of willing challengers, Chris Weidman is probably at the top of the list as far as a fighter that actually wants to fight Israel Adesanya outside of Jared Cannonier. But wanting to fight Israel Adesanya and earning the right to fight Israel Adesanya, two completely different things. And in the MMA landscape, Chris Weidman has had, unfortunately, a rough patch in has hit a rough patch in his career. He's coming off of a win over a semi, I don't want to say semi-ranked, but a later half-ranked opponent, a top 15 opponent, we'll say. And I believe that, he looked very good in that fight, but it was a close fight. And Chris Weidman has fallen on some tough times in his career. He lost the Gegard Mousasi fight in odd fashion at UFC 210 in Buffalo. He lost his title, obviously, to Luke Rockhold in just pure violent fashion. That fight should have been stopped sooner. One of the worst late stoppages. Waiting a round later to stop that fight was a huge mistake on the part of Herb Dean. And he's had other slip-ups. I mean, Jacare Souza, another slip-up. Yoel Romero, another slip-up. So, Chris Weidman, I think in order for Chris Weidman to seriously tell the world, the MMA world, the MMA masses, that he is interested in a fight with Israel Adesanya, he's got to do a lot more to earn that fight. He's got to do a lot more to basically say, yep, I'm ready for this fight. I'm ready to go. He's got to get a couple more wins. That's what I'm trying to say. For the love of God, you can't ask for a title shot or say that you're ready for a title shot to fight the champ when you haven't met the standards of a true challenger just yet. You got to work your way back up. And, I love Chris Weidman. One of my, favorite stories in MMA when he beat Anderson Silva. But, you can't lose 3 or 4 fights, 4 out of 5 fights, and then say, well, I won one, so now I'm ready to get back into title contention. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. If it did, everyone would do it, but not many people do it. And, I think that stylistically, though, Chris Weidman does have a point in the sense that Chris Weidman against Israel Adesanya, Weidman the wrestler, Israel Adesanya the striker, I will never publicly, I want to say this publicly on the show with my face attached to it, I will never, ever say that Israel Adesanya has no chance. I will never say that. I will never pick against Israel Adesanya ever again. And I won't pick against Israel Adesanya ever again due to the fact that I did pick against him previously, taking on guys like Kelvin Gastelum and even the Paulo Costa fight. I thought I was almost right with the Kelvin Gastelum fight because that fight was a war. But Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa, I thought that fight was going to be a barn burner. I thought it was going to be a war, and Israel Adesanya walked in there and just made it look extremely easy. And it just it's still, I am still shocked by it. Paulo Costa looked ordinary and average in there, and Israel Adesanya looked like a guy that had been a championship vet, like a vet as a champion, a guy that has fought in as many title fights as Anderson Silva, as John Jones, as George St. Pierre. He looked like one of the true GOATs in the octagon last Saturday against Paulo Costa. It was a fantastic performance. I don't see Israel Adesanya losing anytime soon, and I don't see Chris Weidman getting that title shot anytime soon until he rattles off victory after victory after victory. You need a solid 3 straight wins, Chris Weidman, to get back into that title picture, and I think he can make it happen. So that's my take on that. We do get a comment. Jason says, I don't think you can call that a fight versus Costa. All Costa did was taunt and run away. Yeah, I mean, it was a fight in the sense that they were both fighting, but Costa just the game plan, I think, went completely out the window. Everyone has a game plan until they get punched in the face, as Mike Tyson once said. Everyone has a game plan until they fight a wacky, awkward striker like Israel Adesanya, right? So I think that Costa went in there with a game plan. He went in there knowing what he was going to do, but you can't do what Costa likes to do against Israel Adesanya. You just can't. He's just too awkward, too herky-jerky, constantly switching his stance, constantly trying to provide different looks to his opponent. And Costa I think he was just mind blown by Israel Adesanya in terms of the looks that he gave him, and he didn't know what to do. He thought, if I taunt him, Israel will throw more at me, and then I'll be able to counter. He's basically looking to counter, which Costa is not a counterpuncher. Israel Adesanya forced Costa to become a counterpuncher, which he is not. So great comment, Jason. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Next topic of discussion. New UFC light heavyweight champion Jan Blachowicz. He is making some headlines. He is opening his mouth early as the UFC light heavyweight champion, calling out former UFC heavyweight and former UFC light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier. Jan Blachowicz calls out Daniel Cormier, and then DC says no thanks. Can't say I'm too surprised about that one and the fact that DC said no thanks. Daniel Cormier had a long, illustrious career. In terms of the accolades, the laundry list of accolades that this guy accrued over his combat sports career. I'm not talking about fighting. His MMA career was remarkably short for the success that he had. He didn't really bloom into the mixed martial arts game until he was about 30, 31, 32. But prior to that, one of the best NCAA wrestlers, one of the best transitional NCAA wrestlers, transitioning from NCAA wrestling to mixed martial arts. And if anyone has the right to say thanks, but no thanks, it's Daniel Cormier. That being said, let's just play, styles make fights. Let's just have fun with this one. Jan Blachowicz versus Daniel Cormier. That is an amazing fight. Jan Blachowicz, the performance that he put on against Dominic Reyes was extremely eye-opening as well. I came away from UFC 253 thinking, Israel Adesanya is the biggest superstar in the sport, but Jan Blachowicz, what UFC light heavyweight is going to be able to withstand the power that Jan Blachowicz has? He is just as devastating a striker at light heavyweight outside of Jones, which Jones, you have to cancel him out now due to the fact that he is no longer the UFC light heavyweight or in the UFC light heavyweight division, as well as the UFC light heavyweight champ. Obviously, he left the division to go to the heavyweight division. So we cancel John Jones out and we say, who's the hardest puncher? Jan. Who is the best wrestler at 205 if he was still competing? Daniel Cormier. So a classic striker versus wrestler matchup between Jan Blachowicz and Daniel Cormier, and two guys that I think would create a really fun fight. It's not like Daniel Cormier can't punch or can't strike, but Jan Blachowicz and Dominic Reyes, watching that fight, watching both of those guys weigh in and understanding that there's a huge size difference between both of these guys. Dominic Reyes is a true 205er light heavyweight. He has athleticism. He can move side to side. He can circle. That's what he did really well against John Jones. Couldn't circle against Jan Blachowicz because Jan Blachowicz was taking it to him early and often with kicks to the body, kicks to the legs, and over-the-top punches to the head. And obviously those added up early because they were often, and that was all she wrote eventually. Just a two-piece and a soda combo from Jan Blachowicz put Dominic Reyes down. And the fact that that happened to Dominic Reyes, coming off the performance that he had against John Jones, was it was a great championship-winning performance by Jan Blachowicz. And I would love to see him fight a Daniel Cormier or a John Jones, but I just don't see it. Jones is a heavyweight now. DC says no thanks. And really, why would DC come back when, his last fight against Stipe, he even admitted he felt a little old in there. He felt a little slow. No need for Daniel Cormier to fight again. There just isn't. His legacy is cemented in stone. So as I said, fire away some comments and we will get this going. If anyone's got any more comments, fire them away. I'll try to get to them. The last topic that I want to discuss, and to me, this is the grand finale of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast MMA show, talking about the biggest storylines in mixed martial arts. And this storyline, to me, is so unique. I will dive into why, but I just want to start off by saying I am thankful, extremely thankful, that Michael Chandler is a UFC fighter now. I'm extremely thankful that Michael Chandler is a member of the UFC. I think it's great. I think this guy belonged in the UFC 3, 4, 5 years ago. He has been regarded as one of the best lightweights in the world for about 8, 9 years now. So for Michael Chandler to get this opportunity finally in his career, big ups to him for the patience of working through the whole Bellator free agency and figuring that out. Free agency is such a weird thing in mixed martial arts right now because it's finally growing at the rate that it should, between multiple suitors, between the UFC, between Bellator, between PFL, between one FC, one championship. And you have some options overseas too, not including the ones that I just mentioned. You have Risen and you have some other ones, but in terms of the big players, right? The UFC is the biggest organization in mixed martial arts. It is the NFL of MMA. Bellator has grown. Michael Chandler was essential in Bellator's growth. So for Bellator to lose a guy like Michael Chandler, it'll be really interesting to see what they do after Chandler. Who's the next guy that they build up? Is it Michael Venom Page? Is it Diego Lima? If Lima gets past Gegard Mousasi, you bet your butt it is. And in terms of the next step for Bellator, that's another caveat to this storyline. they'll have to find a solid replacement because Michael Chandler served that brand really well. He did lose his title a couple times only to get it back, and it just showed the fortitude that he had in his Bellator MMA career. So, awesome stuff that he's finally a member of the UFC, right? I just want to mention that to start off this topic. But Michael Chandler signs a deal with the UFC. They bring him in, and at last, right? But the storyline afterwards was that the UFC was working on a bout between Tony Ferguson and Michael Chandler. What a kick in the teeth that fight is for your UFC debut. I want to start by saying that. Michael Chandler signed it quickly. I mean, that was ready to go, ready to rock on Chandler's end. But then you had Dustin Poirier, who I mentioned at the top of the show, who could quite possibly be fighting Conor McGregor, and I'll get to that again when we answer questions. But you almost saw that. You almost saw Tony Ferguson versus Michael Chandler, but then Poirier came into the picture, and then Poirier came out of the picture, which then created a scenario that if the Khabib Nurmagomedov Justin Gaethje fight ever needed a backup, the backup should be Michael Chandler. That is a little bit odd to me. Should the backup be Michael Chandler or should the backup be Tony Ferguson? I personally think the backup should be Tony Ferguson. I know Tony Ferguson lost his last fight to Justin Gaethje. I know that Tony Ferguson is not in the right time frame based on preparation. He's saying that he's preparing for a fight, but coming off of that loss, fighting Justin Gaethje again, if Khabib fell out, would make sense. Fighting Khabib would make even more sense because that's the fight that everyone and their grandmother wants in mixed martial arts. If I were to ask my grandma, hey, grandma, what fight do you want to watch in mixed martial arts? Oh, the Eagle and the Boogeyman, Khabib and Tony. I'm obviously exaggerating. My grandmother does not watch MMA. At least I don't think she does. But at the same time, that is the fight that people have wanted to see. So I'm not saying Michael Chandler doesn't deserve to be the backup. I like that he got a somewhat immediate title shot again, in this UFC whirlwind, this carousel. But at the same time, be Michael Chandler's debut. Michael Chandler hasn't had the blood, sweat, and tears in the UFC that Tony Ferguson has. Michael Chandler didn't take the fight on short notice against Justin Gaethje like Tony Ferguson did. Tony Ferguson is somewhat getting screwed in this instance. In this instance of Michael Chandler being picked as the backup to Khabib and Gaethje. Now, the backup means he's going to try to make weight for October 24th. And if he doesn't, then he should already have a fight. What the UFC is going to try to do between today and October 24th is get Michael Chandler an opponent. What's even worse than picking Chandler over Ferguson as the guy that should fight as the backup to Khabib and Gaethje would be putting Chandler in there against Ferguson, which I think is possible for October 24th, and then putting Chandler in there as the backup if Khabib and Gaethje, one of them goes down, one of them gets hurt. I think that's not fair to Tony Ferguson. To me, that was my first thought. Great for Michael Chandler, right? Great for him. That's fantastic for him. For Michael Chandler, great. But for Tony Ferguson, oh my God, you got to be really frustrated if you're Tony Ferguson. I mean, his first loss in 10 years. He takes that fight on short notice against Justin Gaethje. He loses. Justin Gaethje is no, walk in the park. He's not, a trip to, a casual day at the office. Justin Gaethje is a wrecking machine. This guy is extremely hungry. And obviously for Justin Gaethje in that fight was through the roof. He had everything to gain. Tony had everything to lose. And I'm not taking away anything from Justin Gaethje's performance in saying this, but, throw Tony a bone there. That's the bone that you throw someone. I think if Chandler wants to, step into the UFC as the backup to Gaethje, that's awesome for him. But I think Chandler has to fight someone that, I keep saying Chandler. When I say Chandler, I think Chandler Bing from Friends. But Chandler has to fight someone that is ranked, that is respected, that is not the biggest name in the top 5 of the division, not a name in the top 5 of the division at all. I think he should fight a Paul Felder, an Ally Quinta, someone that is a respected name inside the UFC's 155-pound division, not a top 5 guy. I mean, I am stating the obvious here, but in a way I am addressing the elephant in the room. The UFC, as I said, is the NFL of mixed martial arts. The best fighters, the best divisions, the deepest divisions in the sport. Bellator, for as much as they have grown in the last 5 years since Scott Coker took them over, they do not have the deepest divisions. And to say that Michael Chandler deserves essentially an immediate title shot as a backup, coming off of a win against Benson Henderson, who was the UFC lightweight champ back in 2010, that is just not. It just doesn't make sense to me. As I said, it's great for Michael Chandler, but doesn't make sense for the rest of the division, for Tony in particular. And Dustin Poirier, that's another guy. He's going off. He's rattling off. I mean, look at some of the guys that Poirier has fought in succession. Gaethje, Eddie Alvarez, the list goes on and on. I mean, he's going through wars. Dan Hooker was a war, and it was going to be a war. That's why everyone was excited for that fight. You knew what you were going to get. That was a fight, unlike Izzy and Costa, where you knew that was going to be a war. Both of those guys were going to give one another trouble. Dustin Poirier deserves, maybe to be the backup or the backup to the backup. But the one guy that doesn't over Michael Chandler, I said Michael Chandler doesn't deserve it over Tony, but the one guy that doesn't deserve it over Chandler or Tony or Poirier is Conor. Conor is ranked 5th in the UFC lightweight division. He hasn't won at lightweight in 4 years. So we'll throw that out there for the McGregor fanboys out there. So that is that. That's my take on that. I think that obviously I'm excited for these next few fights, these next few months. A lot could potentially take place. Hopefully not. Hopefully Khabib and Gaethje stay healthy and we actually do get to see that fight. But just the way that went down with Chandler being the immediate backup, I thought that was crazy. Was that the dangling fruit, the hypnotism that the UFC did on Chandler to make him sign? I don't know. That had to be what made Michael Chandler quickly sign on the contract to get an immediate title shot, essentially, as a backup to Khabib and Justin Gaethje. So comments here. We're diving into comments once again. Jason says, I agree. If Ferguson was ready, he should be the replacement. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate the agreement. But you got all sorts of people out there saying that Israel Adesanya is one of the best in the world. Pound for pound now, coming off of that win over Paulo Costa, I would say Khabib, John Jones, and Israel Adesanya. Those are the top 3 in the world right now. A lot of awesome storylines to dive into in the world of mixed martial arts. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. You watched this live on Facebook Live. You watched it on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast YouTube channel. Both avenues. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you for the comments. And as always, don't take part. You know the rest. Thank you for the T-shirts. Designs by Danny. She did these T-shirts. She made these T-shirts, and they're very, very comfortable. So those will be out for release soon. I got koozies as well. I got a lot of merchandise on the way, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing some of the listeners sporting that merchandise, joining the takeover, and tuning into the show. Sunday, I have one of my buddies, Samuel White, joining me on the show. Samuel is 3-0 in the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Fantasy Football League. He is 3-0 without Saquon Barkley. He lost Saquon Barkley, and he's still 3-0. I think that's pretty impressive. I want to find out how he did it, and how he's continuing to do it. That's a major injury, losing Saquon Barkley. 100% of fantasy owners lost Saquon Barkley for the season. So We'll dive into that and much, much more. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Take care. Go Bills. Stay safe and enjoy the upcoming fights. A lot to dive into in the coming weeks.